And I just want to say here on the record, as one White House correspondent, please don't hug me. Let's just all do our jobs.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Friday, April 25th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP co-founder and president Tom Bevin and White House correspondent Phil Wegmann. Well, guys, today, big escalation in the fight between Donald Trump and the judiciary. This morning, Friday, the FBI arrested a county judge in Milwaukee for obstructing immigration agents when she steered an undocumented immigrant from Mexico through a side door of her courtroom while agents waited outside to arrest him. This is Judge Hannah Dugan. She now faces 2 federal counts. Tom, what do you make of this move by the FBI?
No one is above the law. Isn't that what we have been hearing all along? If the charges are in fact true, and I read through the complaint, the affidavit, and it looks as if she told these folks, they showed up at her courthouse door with a detain order and they were going to deport this guy. And she said, go talk to the main judge at the courthouse. And so they left to do that. And while they did that, she immediately, expedited his thing and let him out the back door. And they found him outside. And so it looks like if she is guilty of doing this, that she actually did commit a crime. And so she's going to be held accountable for that. I mean, we'll see. But there's also this story of another judge down in New Mexico, Las Cruces, who was basically harboring a Tren de Agua gang member in his home. And he was also, I think, arrested and charged. And so I think it is an escalation, but it certainly is, the Trump administration and the, law enforcement apparatus of this country at the federal level saying, look, we're not playing these games anymore. And we're serious about the job at hand, which is to apprehend people who are in the country illegally, particularly those who've committed crimes, and get them out of the country. And so if you're standing in the way of that, especially doing it in an illegal way, you're going to pay a price.
Yeah. Be that as it may, Phil, arresting judges.
You can't be that as it may. That was pretty glib.
I was merely going to point out that arresting judges is
when they do things that are illegal.
Will strike some people as a step too far.
Yeah, this is not quite the Trump administration issuing an arrest warrant for Amy Coney Barrett over a disagreement of the law. Instead, these seem pretty clear cut. You have the one judge who was harboring an alleged gang member in his home, and in this case, in Milwaukee, we haven't seen the criminal charges just yet. But what is alleged, as Tom laid out, is that she sort of helped this illegal immigrant give law enforcement the hook. And I looked into it a bit before we got on air. This individual who was before her, he was facing 3 misdemeanor battery charges. He struck one person allegedly more than 30 times, and then he ended up striking a woman as well. So it's not as if this was just a parking ticket. This is a violent individual that she went out of her way to help. And I don't think the public's going to be very sympathetic when they hear the details, of this allegation. It seems that, if the judiciary was going to look for an opportunity to push back against the executive as a co-equal branch of government, that this is not where they would be sort of throwing their weight around. This is I'm certain that the Trump administration is delighted by this news.
Yeah.
Andy, can I just ask you? I mean, we arrest judges all the time for fraud and all sorts of things. It's not uncommon that judges have to face consequences if they do something illegally. So why is this an escalation? Why is this something that's out of the ordinary?
Well, I mean, they have arrested judges for this before. It happened in the first Trump administration. There was a Massachusetts judge named Shelley Joseph who was charged. She faced 25 years in prison, and they ended up not prosecuting her at the end of the day. I'm not saying, I don't think any of us know enough of the facts right now to make a judgment on her guilt or innocence. But I will say that it is an escalation, and it's a little more than business as usual, Tom. I guess that's what I was trying to point out. Certainly being seen that way on the left. I mean,
well, of course. I mean, and I'm sure this is going to be portrayed. But again, when judges do things that are illegal, they should be held accountable, and in many instances they do, and they are. But because this is an instance of immigration and illegal immigration or deportation, and it involves Donald Trump, suddenly, we can't think about it clearly or logically or dispassionately.
Why do you think, Tom, Kash Patel tweeted about it and then withdrew the tweet? That caused some people to sort of look at the story anew?
Yeah, well, Phil may know more on this backstory. I mean, it looked like he tweeted it or posted it on X and then deleted it and then reposted it a couple hours later after the Justice Department and some of these other it seems like Patel might have jumped the gun here in releasing this news, is my reading of it. And he kind of, had to pull back until his bosses were able to, put this out there officially. And then, I mean, Phil, is there a different explanation for that?
I pinged some folks trying to get to the bottom of it. I think what was later or posted a second time was generally close to the sentiment that Patel shared to begin with. But that's the thing. I mean, this is not just a messaging exercise. If the FBI director had said something that could be introduced as evidence in court to perhaps show that the administration was being punitive or was targeting her for ideological or political reasons, then that perhaps would have been a mistake. But the deleted tweet, I think that's a footnote here, because a little bit later we saw Attorney General Pam Bondi go on Fox News and explain what they saw as the particulars here and what they see as a judge going out of the way to flout federal law.
Yeah. Well, she also tweeted out, Tom, exactly what you said. No one is above the law, was the way she put it. And we'll find out. Let's talk about Ukraine for a second, Tom. Donald Trump actually rebuked Vladimir Putin with the following social media post. He said, I am not happy with the Russian strike on Kyiv. Not necessary. Very bad timing. Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get the peace deal done. This was in reference or following this bombing campaign on Kyiv, killed at least 12 people, injured 90 more. It was the deadliest assault on the city since last July. Tom, what's going on in the White House? And what do you think, is the president really rebuking him, or is he just accusing him of bad timing, which is what he said in his tweet?
I think he's rebuking him, but I saw a bunch of folks compare this to, when Joe Biden told Putin to don't. Right. And this is Trump's version. Stop. It's like, well, OK, mean tweets or tweets. That's not going to do the job. That was the criticism against Biden. I think that's the criticism against Trump. In his defense, they have been working, and that he was in the Oval Office with Marco Rubio, who gave a speech about how Trump is the only person in the world who's actively working toward peace. And Trump interjected and said, listen, we're putting serious pressure on both of these folks. And we need to get this deal done. So he was asked in a Time magazine interview, he was asked about, him being able to solve this in a day. And he admitted that was an exaggeration. And because obviously it didn't get fixed in a day. We're 100 days into this, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of progress on getting that peace deal done. So I think they're going to keep at it for a little bit longer, but they have, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, other members of the administration have said, listen, if we're not going to waste our time, if these folks aren't willing to make a deal of any kind, then we may just move on and walk away from this, which would be, that wouldn't be great for, it wouldn't be great for the world. It wouldn't be great for Russia or Ukraine. And it probably wouldn't be great for the Trump administration, just completely walk away and abandon it.
Yeah, Phil, what's going on inside the White House on this?
Well, right now, Special Envoy Witkoff is in Russia trying to get to a deal. And the reason why this rebuke of Russia was so significant is that perhaps it kind of resets the chessboard here. We've heard Donald Trump direct his ire towards Zelensky quite a bit. This is unusual because Zelensky has said, look, we're ready to comply with the ceasefire. For the last 44 days, we've been trying to do our best. And yet Russia and Putin have not. They've been striking inside of Ukraine. So this could perhaps create an opportunity for the Ukrainians to go to the White House and say, hey, be sympathetic with us because we are the ones who are trying to find an off-ramp here. I'm particularly going to be watching to see if maybe Donald Trump huddles with Zelensky during this overseas trip for the late Pope's funeral. Maybe he can find some common ground there. But, all of this sort of strikes me as Trump has called for peace. He has said that sometimes that he finds Putin easier to deal with than Zelensky. And yet, even going into those negotiations, Trump is already saying, look, Crimea is going to stay with Russia. The war needs to end, but if it doesn't, we can walk away, which would be a boon to the Russians. Maybe he's starting to, realize that it's not just Ukraine that's throwing a wrench in things, that it's also Russia as well.
Yeah, he said on Thursday night, he was asked in the White House what Putin was doing now to help forge a peace deal. And he said, stopping taking the whole country is a pretty big concession. So, Phil, to your point, the perception, and I think it's a fair one, is that he has not been pressuring Putin. He's been pressuring Zelensky publicly, at least. And I will say that, this tweet or post or whatever you want to call it didn't strike me as the strongest rebuke after, such a horrific attack. I mean, it's and like I said, the worst death toll in Kyiv since last summer. So pretty significant.
I don't want to overplay these reports that Ukraine is holding back Russia entirely, that Ukraine is winning. We heard a lot of false information over the last couple of years that turned out not to be true. It's not true that Ukraine is about to fall apart, and it's also not true that they're going to raise their flag over Moscow. But when Trump says that Russia is doing its part by not taking over the entire country, well, Zelensky and Ukraine, they've put up a pretty good fight. And certainly if Russia was able to regain its strength, wait a while, and then renew the invasion, there's more moves that they could make. But they have been blunted. And I think it's important to point out. Obviously, the Russians are far stronger in this situation, but it's not that the Ukrainians are helpless.
Tom, you see it that way?
I mean, it's silly, right? Putin would have taken the whole country had he been able to, and he wasn't able to. And he continues to fight basically in a situation that is all but a stalemate. And again, if he could take the whole country tomorrow, he would do it, but he's not able to do it. So it's not really much of a concession. Look, the Crimea issue is one, that's one that Zelensky says, look, we can't accept that. We're not accepting that. And, Trump's sort of with Putin on that's already done. That was done 10 years ago. So that's kind of maybe the statute of limitations is out on that. And that might be the deal breaker in the end. We'll have to wait and see what comes out of this, but it doesn't seem like they're making much progress, that people are getting, the two sides are getting any closer to crafting something that they can both live with. And if they can't get to that point, then, things are going to break down and we're going to end up walking away from it.
Yeah. Well, the question, I guess, is what are we walking away from? Are we walking away from the peace table, or are we walking away from support for Ukraine, Phil? That seems to be the question that people have.
Indeed. And certainly, we've seen Donald Trump sort of equate those two things. He's frustrated with Zelensky and frustrated with anyone involved who didn't stop this war from beginning with. The reason why this rebuke of Putin is noteworthy is Putin has also been involved from the very beginning. He's the one who sent Russian tanks rolling across Ukraine.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to take a break. You're listening to RealClearPolitics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Phil and Tom, but don't go away. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Phil. And Phil, Saturday is the White House Correspondents' Dinner. The festivities actually started Thursday night. They sort of run through Sunday. But it's kind of a different vibe this year. This is according to Politico. Quoting an unnamed source, the vibe is more serious. And someone else said, it feels like people are looking for a reason to be together. you're in the thick of it right down there at the White House. Is that an accurate portrayal of what's happening?
Certainly, the White House has put a bit more pressure on the White House press corps. There have been all of these fights over who is allowed inside the pool. And maybe Donald Trump isn't violating the First Amendment per se, but he clearly seems to be violating the spirit of the First Amendment when he kicks the Associated Press out of the pool, when he sort of stacks the pool with outlets that are friendly to him. I think it's pretty easy to get caught up in this kind of palace intrigue, which I can assure you, I don't think voters care that much about when they're still battling inflation and they're still curious about, their 401ks. But I think that this whole narrative here is kind of the press telling on itself. What do we always say? We're trying not to be the story. We're trying to focus on the actual newsmakers, and yet I think that there are some who are perhaps, making this challenge more than it really ought to be.
Yeah. Well, Tom, are you dusting off your tuxedo and about to get on a plane from Chicago, come to DC and attend some glamorous parties with celebrities?
I am not. No,
I'm shocked.
The proximate excuse is that my son has a volleyball game on on Friday night, but the real reason is I don't want to go. There was a time when, and we've talked about this before, when we first started RealClearPolitics, when we first, we were the first digital only outlet to get a seat in the White House press briefing room in 2008. And, we went to the Correspondents dinner. I think that was the first one we went to. And then during the Obama years, we went, and Carl is a past president of the White House Correspondents Association. He's been going to that dinner for years and years. But after a few times, it kind of loses its luster a little bit. And certainly the way things have gone, I don't think Trump attended any of them during his first term. He's not attending. Carolyn Leavitt, the White House press secretary, is not going this year. So it's definitely going to have a bit of a different flavor. Now, we've talked before about how they hired this anti-Trump comedian and then basically turned around and released her from her contract. Because that's been part of it, has been the sort of, the comedians have all bombed because they've been, very partisan and offending, half the country who's watching it on C-SPAN while, and it's become a symbol of some of the things that are wrong with Washington, right? Sort of everybody inside the Beltway yucking it up. And we talked about the gridiron dinners, another good example of that. So, I'm not going. I'm perfectly happy to not be going. I don't like wearing a suit, let alone a tuxedo. So I'll be in jeans and a hoodie, like my Fetterman giddy up.
Well, Phil, in terms of networking, in terms of being seen, you're a young reporter in Washington. Do you miss it? I mean, you look pretty good in a tuxedo, by the way, because we went together one year, and you look pretty good.
Yeah, my sources know where to find me, even though I won't be at the White House Correspondents Association dinner this year. And one thing I'm always struck by when I go to these dinners is there's easily, 1,500 or 2,000 people in that ballroom. And yet the actual number of reporters at the White House is between like 50 and 150. It's kind of difficult to run into some of the other journalists who are there in the trenches with you. So this year, I'll be on the motorcycle somewhere in the Eastern Shore. I will not be wearing that tuxedo.
I didn't know you're coming over well, we have to talk about that. If you're coming over the Eastern Shore, you should swing by the house. Well, guys, it is time, because it's Friday, for our favorite new segment.
You can't be serious, man. You cannot be serious.
Tom, this is our third week of You Cannot Be Serious. It's Friday. What do you got?
So anybody who's not living under a rock knows that the NFL draft was last night, and Shedeur Sanders, who was projected by his father to be a top 5 pick, was not picked in the first round. And he built this really elaborate thing inside of his house that had the word legendary all over the place. He had all his bling on and stuff, and they kept showing him, and then his name wasn't getting called. And finally he had to stand up and basically say, like, well, we'll see you tomorrow. That was bad enough in and of itself. You can't be serious. But Jamal Bowman, the former congressman from New York, took to X to post a video today talking about The reason that Shedeur Sanders did not get picked is because of racism, and the NFL doesn't like a strong black man. And that's what this was about. And I mean, you have to ignore the fact that Cam Ward was the number 1 pick in the draft, right? Number 1. You have to ignore the fact that Shedeur Sanders' father, Deion Sanders, was a strong black man when he came into the league and promptly, lit the league on fire and made millions of dollars and became a total celebrity because of it. You have to ignore the fact that I would say half the pundits I saw that were criticizing Shedeur Sanders were black. We're just saying, basically, look, this guy doesn't have what it takes to be a first round or a top tier draft pick. So, Jamal Bowman, whatever your day job is now, you better stick to it, because you cannot be serious with your analysis of the NFL draft.
All right, Phil, what you got?
Tom pulling the fire alarm there on Jamal Bowman.
I see what you did there.
Can't be serious is some of the reporting going around about the White House Correspondents Association dinner. Certainly, the Trump administration makes this job a little bit harder. But I noticed in Politico a quote from an anonymous reporter saying that these days the hugs between colleagues are lasting a little bit longer, and that seems entirely too melodramatic. And I just want to say here on the record, as one White House correspondent, please don't hug me. Let's just all do our jobs and report the news.
All right. Well, we don't coordinate these ahead, but I have a sports one too. A sports story, which is the Baltimore Orioles faced off against the Cincinnati Reds on Sunday. It was a home game in Baltimore. The final score, 24-2. Baltimore used 5 pitchers. Each of them allowed at least 3 runs. Every Cincinnati player who started had at least 1 hit, 1 run, and 1 RBI. So with that final score, 24-22, one fan tweeted, "I thought I was watching the Baltimore Ravens." So Orioles, you're at the bottom of the American League. Season's still young. Hope springs eternal, but you got to be kidding. You got to do better than this. That's our segment. We'll be back. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm with Tom and Phil, but don't go away. Real Clear Politics will return momentarily.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by Stuart Taylor Jr. He is a contributor to Real Clear Politics and the president of Princetonians for Free Speech. Stuart, great to have you.
Nice to be with you, Tom.
Stuart, we're both Princeton graduates, and our alma mater has been in the news recently.
Yes,
most recently, this article that we ran on Real Clear Politics this morning. It's by Christopher Rufo and Ryan Thorpe. It was published in City Journal yesterday evening, and the title on it is "Princeton's War on Civil Rights." Basically, Stuart, it alleges that Princeton has been running afoul of. They got their hands on some internal documents, none of which were shown in this piece, I might add, but which suggests that they've been running afoul of civil rights statutes by discriminating against basically whites in favor of, African Americans and others, people of color, by virtue of their DEI situation. What did you make of this article? Does this ring true to what you know? You've been observing the university in detail now for some years.
I think the article is very worth reading. Chris Rufo who I don't know personally, but I know his work. He's a very smart guy. He's also a very hardline conservative, and therefore I think his insights are worth knowing, but they're also worth checking against other information. So, for example, as you point out, he talks about a lot of racial preferences against whites and against Jews and against males, but he doesn't show documents. He doesn't really produce much proof. Now, he didn't have time to prove his case, so I can understand that, but that's something to take into mind. So just sitting back, judging what he says from what I know, I think Princeton, like the rest of the Ivy League, pretty much, and its other peer institutions, has drifted over the decades into sort of an ideological monoculture, left-leaning monoculture. Not all left-wing lunatic, but left-leaning, and such a lack of conservative voices in the campus community conversations, including the faculty and the administration and the students, There are a few, but there aren't very many, not many, not as much as before. And that kind of a situation tends to lead to kind of being blind to dissenting voices. Viewpoint diversity is not common at Princeton, either in the courses or in the conversations in the dorm rooms, I don't think. And so I think Rufo is onto something. And, one thing he doesn't mention actually, but I'd like to hear President Eisgruber of Princeton explain. According to the official statistics, in 2001 to 2002, 63.5% of Princeton students, entering students, were white. In 2024, that had gone to 31.3%. That's pretty dramatic. It's possible that the way they're counting things might have made it more dramatic than it would be otherwise. But Rufo didn't mention it, but I think Princeton has some explaining to do on that. As Rufo points out, President Eisgruber, after the death of George Floyd in 2020, made a big point of saying that Princeton, his university, which he's been in charge of for almost a decade, at least now, is guilty of systemic racism. He says is in the very structures of the university itself. Now, right. I think I consider myself a moderate, and most of my friends who are watching Princeton are pretty moderate. But I think that's a pretty wild statement to make. Systemic racism, really? I don't think so. I think, as Rufo points out, there's some reason to think there have been racial preferences, certainly in admissions for a long time, and also in faculty hiring, or at least there's allegations and there's some evidence. But in admissions in particular, since the Supreme Court in 2023 banned racial preferences in admissions of students, the Princeton demographic profile in newly admitted students has barely budged. At MIT, for example, there was a dramatic change in the demographic profile. Fewer Blacks, especially fewer Hispanics, more whites, more Asians. At Princeton, the numbers are very stable. And in some other universities, it's kind of, knowing the history of racial preferences and admissions, it's kind of odd that after the Supreme Court says you can't do that anymore, they're still doing it, apparently.
Right. And that's, Carl we've talked about this before in the program, how the universities have either played semantic games or, done different things to basically continue racial preferences despite the Supreme Court ruling. And I was going to mention, that was one of the things that's sort of indisputable. Chris Eisgruber, who is the president of Princeton University, did say that there was systemic racism at the university. The other thing that he mentioned in there, which I think is demonstrably true, is Princeton, like other universities, not just elite Ivy League institutions, but universities and colleges all around the country, has seen a rather dramatic growth in the whole DEI structure, right, of administrators and the like. It's been infused into, basically every part of the university. Again, you've watched this a lot closer than I have, but Eisgruber has presided over that. Presumably previous Princeton presidents maybe have too, but it certainly under his tenure has accelerated, has it not?
It certainly has. It's very, very apparent. I wrote a long article about this in our publication, which RealClearPolitics also published, and there's a whole lot of evidence that they've invested heavily in the DEI structure. That the head of their DEI programs, a woman named Michelle Minter, has been very aggressive in spreading DEI organizations throughout the student, throughout the faculty, throughout the administration, and they've made a big deal of it. Now, in fairness, I got an email from a faculty member who I know well. He says actually in his department, it's very debatable, references to internal documents. He says his own otherwise wokey department has hired 3 white men and 1 white woman for tenure-track positions in the last 5 years, as well as 1 white woman for a lecturer position, without so much of a peep of protest from the all-but-dormant DEI committee. So how deep this DEI penetration of the university goes is debatable, I suppose, but it's clearly grown enormously in recent years.
And Stuart, has there been a shift? I mean, Rufo mentions in the article that Princeton is busy sort of scrubbing its websites of all these DEI references, and we've seen that take place. It seems like there has been a pushback, and universities have sort of reeled back on some of the DEI things because of, after Trump's election, obviously, and we see what's going on now with Harvard. But at the same time, Eisgruber has been one of those presidents who's been fairly out front, wrote an article in The Atlantic, was quoted in the New York Times, sat down for the podcast, basically saying that, universities need to stick together on this stuff and fight the administration.
Well, and he has said that, and it's, a little bit courageous to say that, given the Trump administration's tendency to retaliate against anybody who crosses them. And I'm all for him challenging the Trump administration on this. I think they're using a meat axe, not a scalpel, in the way they're going after the universities. I think the universities in general, and Princeton's just one, but Princeton included, have slid hard to the left in the last, not just the last couple of years, the last 2 or 3, 4 decades. And I think some corrective is very well warranted. Whether the Trump corrective is overkill is a concern I have.
And we've got just about a minute left, so this will probably be the final question, Stuart. But do you think, absent the Trump administration putting the pressure on Columbia and Harvard and some of these other institutions, including Princeton, that these universities would have done any of this? Are they capable of the kind of reform that is a lot of folks, I assume including you, based on what you just said, think is needed and necessary? I mean, is that something they had to be pushed into, or would they have continued down the same path?
I think they definitely have to be pushed into it. They are being pushed into it. It's a good thing that they are being pushed into it, but I hope it's not pushed to the, too far. What has happened over the last few decades is the faculties in particular, and also the administrations, which tend to be far more left-leaning than the faculties even, have drifted to the left, not hiring new diverse faculty members unless they're going for racial diversity. And it's a discouraging trend. There are a lot of people all over the country are dramatically concerned about it, and I'm one of them. That's why we created Princetonians for Free Speech. And speaking of free speech, we had an incident at Princeton 2 weeks ago about when Naftali Bennett, former Israeli prime minister, was shouted down so that he couldn't really complete his remarks by pro-Palestinian demonstrators. And there were a bunch of Princeton administrators there who were supposed to keep a lid on things like that, but they didn't. And the whole thing was a disgrace. And we're hoping that doesn't happen anymore, because we are Princetonians for Free Speech. The ambassador of our ally ought to have a right to come to a university and speak. And we're hoping, encouragingly, the other night, there was another Israeli leader, the ambassador to the United States, and he had a speech and it went off without a hitch, in part because various people, including us, had made a fuss about what happened to Bennett. And free speech is in trouble on campuses all over the country, including Princeton. President Eisgruber talks a good game about free speech, but he doesn't always deliver in occasions like this. I hope he does this time.
All right, we will leave it there. Stuart Taylor Jr., contributor to Real Clear Politics and head of Princetonians for Free Speech. Stuart, thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
All right, we're going to take another quick break, and we'll be right back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Andrew Walworth. And for our next segment, we've once again invited Charlie Stone, who's a contributor at RCP, to share his latest interview that he conducted for the RCP video series, The Unknowns. Charlie's guest is Peter Beinart. He's the author of a new book, Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, A Reckoning. Here's Charlie in conversation with Peter Beinart.
You're an observant Orthodox Jew, correct? What does it mean to be Jewish? Let's just pause before, after the destruction of Gaza. What does it mean to be Jewish?
Judaism is, I would say, a religion in the way that Christianity and Islam are religion, but Jews are also a people. So in some ways you can think of Judaism as being like a cross between a combination of both being Catholic and Italian, which is to say you could be Jewish even if you're an atheist because you believe you're a member of this people, this nation. But there are many Jews for whom also Judaism is actually a set of religious law and religious obligation.
The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, was that a overall good thing? Do you agree with that? Would you have said, I want to vote for that?
No, I think the problem with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 as a Jewish state was that it was only possible through an act of mass expulsion of Palestinians, because the only way you could create a state with a large Jewish majority was through an act. And it wasn't just how many Palestinians they were there, it was also that they were living on most of the land. So the only way in which you could create a state with a large Jewish majority where Jews were living on most of the land was through this act of mass expulsion. I totally understand why many Jews at that time and today believed in the idea of a Jewish state. But I think that Jewish state was also a terrible, terrible kind of crime against the Palestinian people, and it laid the groundwork for a lot of the violence and conflict and suffering we've seen since.
What would have been your pathway at that point?
It would have been to work towards what I support now, which was an equal binational state, a state that allowed Jews and Palestinians to live together equally under the law.
So in your estimation, what is the level of freedom in the current state of Israel? From freedom of speech, excellent or horrible? From treating people with equal rights, wonderful or horrible? How would you give them a grade?
For Israeli Jews, I'd give them an A-, pretty darn good. But for Palestinians, well, let's just say that even Israel's own leading human rights organizations, one of which is called B'Tselem, the other one is called WHC, have said that Israel is practicing apartheid, right? So that's a pretty low grade for Palestinians.
What is the arguments that come at you, I think, from all sides, right? As other Jews that are like, Peter, stop it. Just give me some resonance of what are the most powerful arguments that they bring to you? And you're like, I have a little bit of a hard time answering that. Well,
I mean, these are arguments that I've been involved in for a long time. So they're very familiar arguments to me. I think that at its core, the basic argument would be, unless Jews rule, Jews will not be safe. I think that's the core of the argument, that Jews have to be in control of this country, or else Jews are going to be in danger.
You had an interesting quote in your book. It was something, we are not history's permanent virtuous victims. It seems, if you look at history, that there's something about being a Jew and being Jewish that it's constantly being persecuted. Is that an accurate assumption? I mean, throughout history.
Well, I mean, Jewish history is long and varied, but there is a tremendous amount of persecution. There's no question about that. But in Israel and Palestine today, the circumstances are very different, right? Because in Israel and Palestine today, it's not like Jews are not the legal inferiors like Jews were in the Russian Empire or in Nazi Germany. Jews are actually legally superior. So the status that Jews enjoy in Israel and Palestine today is a little bit more like the status that white Southerners enjoyed under Jim Crow segregation, or that white South Africans enjoyed under apartheid, or that Protestants in Northern Ireland enjoyed before the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland.
But if you were to draw the line around Israel's borders, even in 67, 73, I mean, they've been attacked, they've repelled invasion. October 7th, they were invaded. Is the argument that, you're superior, you're fine, you're safe, is that really an argument when there has been evidence of constant either missile invasion, terrorism against Israel?
My argument is that Israeli Jews and Palestinians live alongside each other, and so their safety is mutually interdependent, right? This was the point that Martin Luther King made about white and black Americans, that they were woven into one garment of destiny. And so my point is that when you deny people basic human rights, basic freedoms, then you're imposing a lot of violence on them, and that violence also endangers you. So if we look at October 7th, the horrifying event of October 7th, where civilians were, in addition to soldiers, were killed, people were taken captive, some of them are still captive. It's important to understand the condition of Gaza on October 6th, right? Gaza was not an independent country that crossed a border. Gaza was under Israeli control. It's a little bit like, if we go back to our history, imagine most of the people from Gaza are refugees. They're people whose families were expelled from what's now Israel in 1948. So it's a little bit like if we imagine a Native American reservation in the 19th century, where people have been pushed off their lands into this tiny area. Gaza is only half the size of New York City. And then they break out of that and they do a terrible thing and they kill men, women, and children, right? Doesn't make it right, but if we're going to make sure everyone is safer, we have to understand the context and Gaza was not an independent. It wasn't like an army coming from Mexico attacking the United States.
Well, in 2005, right, Hamas is elected the representative body of Gaza, but people voted to have Hamas, to have Hamas represent them, and lots of aid was provided, both from Israel to some extent and others, to shape or to help Hamas and the people and the Palestinians to rebuild that area. I mean, there's evidence that some of that money was used for tunnels and missiles and all that. Now, it just seems a little bit weird to say Hamas, nobody could help them, and so they had to do something.
You're right. Some aid does go in. You're totally right. And some of that aid is definitely used for military purposes. But Gaza is also shut off from the world in what Human Rights Watch calls an open air prison, right? And so there's not fresh water, there's not electricity. The unemployment rate is 70%, right? And so the question is, was that a good response by Israel to this election? I think it was actually a very counterproductive response that's actually made Israel less safe.
But Hamas was the government in charge during that time, right? That didn't invest in infrastructure, did not try to solve the problems of water, did not try to broker.
I mean, I'm not trying to defend Hamas. Hamas is an oppressive Islamist group. Frankly, the Fatah, who controls in the West Bank, Mahmoud Abbas, he's also very repressive, right? But this, again, it's worth thinking about Gaza as a large prison. Right. So because you have no access of getting in and out or sending goods in and out without Israeli permission. And that's very, very highly controlled. So even if you had a good government in Gaza, the capacity to do economic development in a prison is really limited.
You had mentioned, obviously, what happened on October 7th. What should have been Israel's response instead of what they did? If you were the leader of Israel, how would you deal with that?
That's a great question. And I think, what I'm going to say is going to sound crazy because at a human level, right? And this is the same thing after 9/11, right? When you get punched in the nose, you get something terrible happens to you. Painful and horrible and humiliating. The human response is to just punch back, especially if you're much, much stronger, right? Israel is 100 times, 1,000 times stronger, right? So just like the United States, that was what we did after 9/11, right? But the problem with what Israel has done, before I say what I think they should have done, is that they've destroyed Gaza, most of the buildings, hospitals, agriculture, schools, bakeries destroyed. And you know what? Hamas is still there. Hamas is still there. In fact, they have tons of new recruits because they recruit from families of people that Israel has killed. And they're going to have a lot of new weapons. You know why? Because they're actually assembling weapons from the weapons that Israel dropped on them, just like the Viet Cong did when we were fighting Vietnam. So my response would have been to recognize that this is not fundamentally a military problem. It's a political problem. You're denying Palestinians their basic freedoms. And if you deny people their basic freedoms, you're imposing violence on them. And some group of them, just like those Native Americans in the 19th century, are going to respond with violence against you. So you have to give them a pathway to freedom. And I think Israel could have had various different things it could have done. It could have let Marwan Barghouti out of jail. He's the most popular Palestinian leader. He's not an Islamist. It could have started withdrawing settlements deep in the West Bank that for Palestinians are a visible sign of the fact that they live under occupation and they're not going to get their freedom. It could have done things to respond politically because this is a political problem fundamentally.
When you go to your temple, do other people that are there, do you hear whispers? Do you have people pointing? Like what is your burden by articulating some of these views amongst American Jews?
Well, these are really deeply held views. And so there are definitely people who very, very, very strongly disagree with me. And they make those views known. And it has been tough on some of my friendships. But, I don't know if you're a religious person, but for me, when I go to a synagogue, it's not about politics. It's about my relationship with God, my effort to live according to Torah, and the joy and meaning that I find in prayer and in religious study. And thank God, I have a lot of people who share that same impulse. And so we might disagree in politics, but that's what comes first.
With that, we want to thank you for your time, Peter, and we wish you continued success.
Thanks a lot, Charlie. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to RCP contributor Charlie Stone in conversation with author Peter Beinart. You can hear and see the full exchange, as well as more of Charlie's interview series on RealClearPolitics.com. That will do it for today's program. I'm Andrew Walworth on behalf of Carl, Tom, Charlie, and all of us here at RCP. Thank you for listening. We'll be back here on Monday. Have a great weekend.